Welcome to a Top Grades Made Easy video with me, Mr. Salles, and it's going to be even easier because you've got double the bang for your buck, first rate tutor. So we're going to take you through questions 4 and question 2 from paper 2. What links them? It's the comparison. And which of us is going to dazzle them first with our method?
Okay, so basically we had decided to do the comparison questions for 2 and 4 in language paper 2 because we put out a vote and overwhelmingly lots of you guys had voted and asked for the comparison structure for these 2 questions. One of the things that my students always ask when we go over language paper 2 is why bother writing different responses for question 2 and question 4 if they're both comparison and if different examiners are going to look at it. The biggest reason why you always want to distinguish your points and write different paragraphs for 2 and 4 is because question 2 is always thematic. Question 4 is always to do with the writer's viewpoints and perspectives. And what I want us to first begin by talking about is with question number 2, right? And this is how you start distinguishing between the two, so that you do well on both questions. The first top thing that we obviously discussed is timings. Timings is really important and essential. Why is it?
So there are 2 reasons. The first is you want to maximize the right amount of time for each question. But the other is if you spend extra time on one question and lose it on another, you will lose marks because the marks at the end of a question are really hard to get. The marks at the beginning of a question are really easy to get. So never overrun on a question. Go to the beginning of the next. You will earn more marks.
So how much time therefore should students spend on question 2 according to you in language paper 2?
Right, so I've got a method where I say to my students, you don't earn any money for planning. Any marks, but you know, it's like money. You don't earn any marks for planning, and you don't earn any marks for thinking time. You only earn marks for what you write. So you need to start writing as quickly as possible. And therefore, you read the source as you answer the question. And you don't just spend ages reading the sources first. And for that to work, you get 1.5 minutes per mark. So this is an 8-mark question. You have 12 minutes. And once the 12 minutes are up, wherever you are, middle of a sentence, it doesn't matter, hit the next question.
Okay, so my approach is a little bit different. I always recommend to my students in my masterclasses, spend 10 minutes on this question, try to write at least 1 comparison paragraph, use the material and obviously the evidence from both. And I think it's great what you mentioned about using the sources to inform as you're answering. What I always tell my students in my Sunday GCSE masterclasses is always read the question first. In fact, read the question paper and all 5 questions first. Then as you're reading the 2 inserts, you are literally underlining and selecting information that you then take that you're going to use for question number 2. And in my perspective, I think 10 minutes is more than enough for the 8 marker. Okay. Question 2 is a thematic question. What I mean by that is when you look at the 2 inserts that you're given in any language paper 2 questions, there's always an underlying theme. Okay, so when you take a step back, there's always some kind of general idea and some kind of general theme that is explored in both questions, right? It can be, for example, camping experiences, doctors working under pressure, or doctors and nurses working under pressure, sleep problems and insomnia. These are just some examples from past paper questions, meaning what question 2 is asking you to do is write a summary of this theme, okay?
So I would echo that. You definitely have to write about different things. I don't have to remember anything in advance of the exam. I just need this technique. Underline the keywords in the question and then only answer using those keywords. So this will always be on a thing, something physical that you can touch and feel. And, well, actually, no, because camping isn't something you can touch and feel, but it's still a thing. And this will always be on stuff that you can definitely not touch and feel because it's feelings. But I don't need you to remember that. If you just underline the keywords in the question, then you'll do that automatically.
Let's talk about how to structure a perfect comparison paragraph. Now, If you are familiar with First Rate Tutors and our YouTube channel, you will know I absolutely love the PEEL method. Point, evidence, explanation, link. I think it's a really simple and straightforward method. Just because it's 4 steps doesn't mean it's basic. You can still have a very detailed and thorough paragraph, but making sure you don't skip out on any of those steps. And I still always recommend, again, to my students in my weekly GCSE language paper 1 and paper 2 masterclasses, use the PEEL framework. And this is how you use a PEEL paragraph framework for comparison. It's really simple and straightforward. Start off your opening point talking about source A and source B. From the beginning, you are showing comparative skills. You can talk about both sources in the same paragraph because that's part of comparison. Then step number 2 in your evidence, quote something from source A and quote something from source B. You are consistently showing comparison. Then step number 3 in your explanation, here you're simply summarizing for this question. You don't need to talk about techniques. You don't need to highlight, lots of analysis. You're just simply saying what this demonstrates in terms of similarities and differences. Do that for both source A and source B. And then in your link, when you're linking back to the question, you're showing an awareness of what the question requires. Link back to both sources. Integrate both sources in the same paragraph, because once you run out of those 10 minutes, you have compared and then you can move on, okay? So what I usually find is some students have one paragraph for source A and then a second paragraph for source B. The reason why this is a really risky approach and also is not really showing, for me, very much comparison is, number 1, if you run out of time and you've done just one paragraph and after 10 minutes you need to move on to the third question, well, you've only talked about one source, right? So immediately you're not going to get half of the marks. But also the second reason why I always recommend to my students to integrate both sources is this question is comparison. So comparing is talking about both in the same paragraph.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a completely different method, and the important thing is for you just to pick the one that fits. Yeah, we're not talking right and wrong, we're talking you're the learner and you understand how you learn, just pick the one you like. So this for me is cognitively difficult. I've got to remember a lot of stuff at once, and I'm a simple person, I just want the simplest way. And so this is what I think is the simplest way. I'm going to write about the first source, source A, right? And I'm just going to spend half my time, which is 6 minutes, writing as much as I can about that source, but only about what's in the question, just the keywords. I get marks for how many explanations I write. It's an 8-mark question, so I need 8 explanations. So, what is an explanation? Anything which could start with "this suggests" or words that mean "this suggests." And I'm going to write 4 of them about source A. I can also think, well, maybe one of them won't score any marks, I might do 5, but I'm not going to go past my 6-minute time limit because then I've got to go to source B. I can, if I'm brilliant, write a comparison sentence at this stage saying source B is similar but also different because, or I can wait until I've done source B and then write that at the end. It doesn't matter. So comparison is not an assessment objective, and so you only have to show the examiner that you are comparing. You don't have to show you're comparing all the way through. When you're writing about source B for 6 minutes, again, you're writing 4 explanations for "this suggests." If you see a "this suggests" which is similar or different to what you've just written about source A, guess what? You're going to say similar to or different to, and that's your comparison. And then you've got 8 explanations in total, 4 from each. You've got 8 explanations which could score 8 marks. If you've got the time, add 1 or 2 just in case one of them or 2 of them don't score. And that is the quickest and simplest way to get full marks in my thinking.
Okay, so let's talk about question number 4. This is the writer's viewpoints and perspectives, which you are not recycling or using the same points as question number 2, guys. Question 4, in terms of timings, how much do you think students should spend with this question? So
it's a 16-mark question, 1.5 minutes per mark gives me 24 minutes. Yeah, 12 minutes for source A, 12 for source B.
Okay, mine is significantly shorter. I would say about 17 minutes because I think, for example, with question 5, what I usually recommend to my students in my GCSE masterclass is you're always suggested by the exam board, do 45 minutes for this question. I think because it's worth half of the paper's overall marks, that is still not enough time to give you a winning chance of writing enough for this question. So I always tell my students for that one, 15 minutes, meaning because we're then going to borrow from section A, I always suggest for question number 4, around 17 minutes, maximum 20 minutes, okay? So for this question, as I said at the start, it is very different to question number 2. This question is always going to ask you and require you to talk about the writer's feelings and perspectives. The structure and my approach, which I teach to my students in my weekly Sunday GCSE language paper 1 and paper 2 masterclasses every Sunday at 5 p.m, by the way, we literally use the same approach and the same structure. Point, evidence, explanation, link. However, the difference which distinguishes this question, okay, so for example, when talking about writer's feelings and perspectives in the point, talk about source A and source B, evidence, source A and source B. Now in the explanation paragraph, which is the most essential paragraph and is always the bulk of the answer. The reason why this part is really important when you're talking about both source A and source B is not only do you need to talk about the methods that the writers are using when conveying the different feelings and perspectives. This is now where you also inject your own level of evaluation, your own level of inference, and you start adding analysis to give yourself a fighting chance of doing really well in this question and scoring as close to full marks as you can, okay? Point, talk about both sources in terms of writers' feelings and perspectives, evidence, both sources, explanations, both sources, but here you are layering in technique, you're adding in terminology, you're adding in things like inference, and then finishing off with a link back to the question. How would your approach differ?
So I'm going to exactly the same approach that I had with question 2. So I've underlined the key words so I know what the thoughts and feelings are about. And then I'm going to spend half my time writing about source A. How many explanations do I need? It's the same as the number of marks, 16 marks. So I need 8 explanations about source A. What are the explanations going to look like? I'm just going to find something in source A that's relevant to the question, and then I'll say, this suggests. That's a mark. Then I'll find the next thing, and then I'll write, this suggests, and my explanation will be the mark. Your subject terminology will happen naturally when you look at the quote and you think, well, you know, what is that? Is it a metaphor? Is it a simile? Is it alliteration? Hint. All of those will always come up. Personification will sometimes come up. The other one that always comes up is contrast, 100% of the time, when whatever the question is. So I can guarantee that my methods will just happen naturally as I'm writing. Then I need to get to source B. Again, I've got my choice of writing a comparison sentence between source A and source B, or if I forget, I'm going to write it at the end. Just as before, when I'm writing my this suggests for source B, I'm going to realise straight away, oh, that was similar to something I wrote about source A. I'll say it's similar, or that was different. I'll say it's different. Again, comparison is not an assessment objective, so you don't need it all the way through your answer. You just need it in your answer, and having it all when you get to source B is totally fine. The crucial thing, though, is you need 16 explanations to get full marks, and that's tough. So what you do need to practice is handwriting speed, because the faster you write, the easier it is to get your explanations than to get your marks.
Yes, so speed writing and speed reading is something that literally distinguishes the students that hit 7s, 8s and 9s from the ones that get 4s and 5s, okay? So that's something that you have to consistently practice. This is actually one of the reasons why English isn't a last minute cramming session, because part of English revision and part of passing your exams, unfortunately, is also a test of your speed. And you only increase that speed through consistent practice. It's like practicing for running or a marathon. You can't just wake up one day and then do intensive practice beforehand, because you're going to get winded and probably not finish that marathon. You have to put in that consistent practice over a long time to improve in your speed reading and speed writing. And of course, that's something that we're going to be covering when hopefully Mr. Salles does his language masterclass.
Yeah,
if he does.
you're forcing me into it. I'm going to do some masterclasses.
Okay, but of course, guys, if you literally want to hit the ground running, just join in my weekly Sunday Sunday GCSE Language Paper 1 and Paper 2 masterclasses. And also I always write grade 9 model answers for different past paper questions, because another aspect of learning is seeing what an ideal response looks like, using some of that material and including it into your writing, but also most importantly checking and seeing, is the quality of my writing getting closer to this quality, which is a grade 9 response that I offered to my students, or am I still stuck here? Okay, so of course guys, you have two options. Remember that this channel is giving you solutions and making this journey towards your GCSEs less stressful and easy. Okay, that's really it guys.
There you go.
Thank you so much for watching. Right.